Hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Edberg and Jared Nelson. Guys, how are you? We've finally arrived at a constitutional chapter of the Directory for Worship. How does it feel?
I forgot what it feels like to actually comment on something that matters. I'm just kidding.
Oh, man. Scott, tell us what's going on. You sent us a picture of your new pulpit today or yesterday, and it looks great. Is construction's moving along on your new place?
Yeah, carpet's installed, stage is being installed as we speak. We have frosted glass and glass to let light in. I'm installed in the sanctuary right now as well. Sound system's being installed. We're hoping that by Easter, I think Easter's, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that in public, but I think we're going to be here on Easter for the first worship service. And then the very next week, we're hosting Presbytery as well. And so those are the things that are pressuring us to actually finish the sanctuary. But we're pretty close, and that's exciting.
I have to ask, on your pulpit, do you have any secret compartments that you had them put in there, whether it's for books or Celsius or something like that you can hide in there?
Yeah, I actually had them cut out like this perfectly Celsius-shaped hole so that it sits in there like a cup holder, you know? It's no, I'm looking for compartments. It was made by a church member, and he did a wonderful job at it. And he was asking me before all these, do you want drawers and cabinets? And I'm like, goodness, this is just want a big old preacher desk. That's what I want. And so I got a big old preacher desk.
Jared, you've caused quite a kerfuffle on Twitter lately with posting about Bibles.
My Bible is just falling apart, and I asked if I should rebind it. Apparently that's a topic of hot contention.
So high maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm discovering why people buy more premium Bibles. I was against it 10, 15 years ago, and I just had True Tone type things, or imitation leather. And all of my Bibles are falling apart, and I've got notes in them. And I'm like, okay, now I see why people do this, so that it'll actually last in their ministry, and they can keep using the same Bible. So I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to make fun of the premium Bibles guys anymore.
Speaking of which, friend of the show, Dave Dalfino, runs Cherry Hill Bibles. Y'all go check him out. Hey, David.
He's the sponsor of today's episode. So if you use our...
He's definitely not, just for the record. we make jokes about this sometimes about people that don't listen to the show, but Dave actually does, so...
Just type in Polity Matters and you'll get a 5% discount.
Oh, man.
We just got to speak it into reality.
Just, yeah.
Cherry Hill's made like a custom, I think, a Westminster Standards case for Fred Greco, so... Well, they did some good work.
I should double check with him, but isn't he the guy that made the blue BCO leather binder?
So.
I mean, the level of coveting related to that BCO blue leather thing, I mean, is only matched by the Banner of Truth and the RHB Watson sets that are going. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, he's also made these nice Westminster Confessions of Faith that are beautifully bound. This is my 5-year anniversary from my church.
What's a Westminster Confession of Faith?
It's just something, something somewhat important.
We're finally in a constitutional portion of the Directory for Worship in BCO 56. I've known guys before that are studying for exams in the PCA, and you'll say, hey, tell me which chapters of the book of the Directory are constitutional, and they rattle them off right away. 56, 57, 58, and 59.3. And then I've said, and what are they about? And they have no idea. Now, you can probably make a pretty reasonable guess, sacraments, right? But we are talking about baptism today. And I wanted to start with a question we got from Josh Torrey on Twitter, which, for the record, I'll refuse to call it X. It's not. It's Twitter. Joshua Torrey, longtime non-listener of the show, wants to know why there's no chapter on adult baptism. And do Presbyterians even baptize adults? He's making a joke, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation. This is about the administration of baptism and baptism of infants and children, and that seems to be the main reference points here. Jared unmuted, so...
Yeah, I'll just note two things. Number one, if you are dealing with the baptism of adults, if you look at the OPC's BCO, they have some good suggestions for that. And secondly, the Directory Committee may be proposing such a thing, so stay tuned.
Might they?
Might they?
can neither confirm nor deny its existence.
Oh, we're just going to hope it into existence, right? Speak it into existence. We've gone word of faith at Polity Matters today. This chapter ensures it's the beginning of the discussion about sacraments, making sure that we treat them properly and the same across the board in the PCA, baptism, and specifically for infants and children. Anything else to preface with, guys? I mean, we were kind of joking about how these chapters might be long, but the more I get into it, the more I'm like, well, I don't know. This is pretty straightforward. I'm going to trust you guys to take us off the rails at a couple points. So, All right, let's get into BCO 56.1. Baptism is not to be unnecessarily delayed, not to be administered in any case, but by any private person, but by a minister of Christ called to be the steward of the mysteries of God. So, a couple of prohibitions at the beginning and then an instruction. Let's just start at the beginning and work our way through. Baptism is not to be unnecessarily delayed. So, presumably, we're thinking of someone who's made a profession of faith, although I realize that's not the main topic of this particular chapter, or somebody has been born into the church membership and baptism is expected. I know we had some questions on social media. What do we mean here when we talk about baptism being unnecessarily delayed?
Baptists?
Ooh.
I think it's probably saying that it shouldn't be delayed until a credible profession of faith or some profession of faith by a 3 or 4 year old or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I within churches that have a somewhat of a baptismal regeneration idea, Catholic churches, even Lutheran churches, you'll see they want to baptize right away. You'll see the idea of emergency baptism. So a lot of times you see it really soon. Within Presbyterian circles, I think I've baptized a lot of like 3-month-olds, 4-month-olds,
Mm-hmm.
It's not usually on the 8th day, which was Jewish tradition for circumcision, and then in the early church even, but it's not delayed until, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
When I was at RTS Jackson at First Pres in Yazoo, I remember we had our firstborn in November, and it was December, and Pastor Charlie was like, "Are you going to make that child walk up for his own baptism?" And I was like, "Goodness, it's only been a month, We don't even know if we're supposed to take this kid out because we're first-time parents." But yeah, your children shouldn't walk up to their own baptism. I think that is a valid point. They shouldn't have to walk up to be baptized. You should offer them to the Lord them yourselves.
Good. I think sometimes people misunderstand this because, Jared, I think your point is fair that it's probably speaking about the Baptist tradition more than anything else. If you're waiting several months, nobody's going to really say much to you. But we had some guys wondering, for the record, I've put out questions on Twitter the last couple weeks about recording these episodes, just getting what people are interested in talking about. How do you approach the topic of delay with members? When does a delay become long enough to say something? They might not be folks that are trying to practice, like a profession of faith baptism, but maybe you've got folks in your church that are just not paying attention to, when they have a kid and trying to seek out baptism. Guys want to know what practical advice we have.
I think you start out how Charlie started out, which was, it was a joke with a serious end.
Yeah.
Right? He was messing with me, but he wanted to get us on the books. And so I think that kind of casual conversation is a good place to start. Usually and typically, at least what I've seen is first-time parents, they're kind of slow to take their child anywhere. And that includes church, and that thus delays baptism. And so starting out informally, this isn't the first child we've baptized at this age, nor will it be the last. And how can we get you on the books? And so I think just regular conversations like that. We've gotten things, how we do it at Providence is we get things kind of pre-approved in some regards for this kind of stuff as we talk with parents, just so that we can leave it up to their leisure, that we could do the baptism almost on a moment's notice without additional session approvals. And so being prepared on the front end, I think, takes away some of the things that can slow you down on the back end. And so having a session approve some of these things in advance to be determined by the schedules of those who will be planning it. That's what I would, informal conversation and clearing the procedural gaps as soon as you can.
Yeah, you can just start asking questions such as, do you have to have some people some family members that come in for the baptism, or just get them thinking in that direction of like, so when would a good date for that be? I just kind of ask it almost presumptuously of like, so when's that date going to be? Or I want to talk to you beforehand, I'll talk to you a bit about baptism before we schedule the date. And just at the end of that talk, say, okay, what date can you have family in, or can you arrange?
Yeah, if you really have to press into it, I've found that BCO 6 is helpful. Remind people that children of believers are members of the church by right of birth, and that baptism is something they're entitled to as a result. And so it's, the baptism is not when their kid joins the church or whatever their thought may be, but that the kid is a member and needs to be baptized as a member. That can sometimes help people kind of get in the right frame of mind and jump on top of it. Some people just don't have these things at the forefront of their minds, and so if you're working with a family in your church, they might just need some encouragement. And I like Charlie's question the best. That makes me laugh.
Yeah, it broaches it appropriately. The other side of it are those who are committed by principle to not baptize, right?
Sure.
And so those are like two different tacks. There's the Presbyterians that, they might be on their first child and just delaying, and they just need a little nudging. But I'm sure many of our churches have admitted members that have Baptist convictions, and those are a little dicier. But I think the minister and the session should still engage with that family. I regularly engage with my Baptist brothers and sisters at Providence when opportunity arises. Often they have questions, and I use those as springboards towards that end. And so constantly trying to appeal to their conscience and hopefully change it as you talk through issues. They may never change, but I think the pastor's still called to do that.
What do y'all think? Let's say you have somebody with those sort of Baptistic convictions, members of your church, they have a baby, they want to wait. Would you wait a certain amount of time? So, if they start waiting, then you also wait for profession of faith? Or if they come to a more Paedo-Baptist perspective and their kid is 5, do you baptize the kid now, or are you still waiting for profession of faith? So, what do you do in that? There can be kind of a weird space in the middle that is between a traditionally Paedo-Baptist and then a Credo-Baptist kind of direction. What advice do you have for guys with folks like that?
Baptize them all.
And let God sort them out.
You just got to baptize. I'm constantly appealing, not for the mere conviction, but for the actual application. We just baptized 2 or 3 kids in the last year based on a change in views from their families, and they were all, I couldn't hold any of them. I mean, I could have picked them up, but it would not have been an infant, like 6, 7, 10-year-olds. I think that's all reasonable.
Lift with
if
your
they're
legs.
Still in the family's house. I would still count that as infant and children baptism, where you should apply the sacrament because they are a covenant child.
Yeah, I've in fact done that before, where we had like 5-year-olds in the family and then like a 2-year-old, and when they came into the church, we just baptized them all. We weren't gonna wait for that.
Yeah, we had a family that came in with their oldest had happened to come to a profession of faith right around the time the parents came to more of a Paedo-Baptist view. And so we baptized their son by profession of faith, and then their other 2 kids who were, I don't know, like 10 and 7 or something, as I think our senior minister called it covenant baptism or infant baptism. But yeah, good. You guys answered that the way I hoped you would answer it. Yeah, baptize your babies. And that means anybody in your house, baptize them, man. Baptize those babies. All right, the second prohibition is baptism's not to be administered in any case by any private person. Jared, I'll ask you, like, what are they getting at here? Do you have any sense of what they're aiming at, or is there a particular case they're trying to address? I mean, historically speaking.
Yeah. Historically speaking,
there you go.
Within the West, especially within Roman Catholic circles, there was a practice of emergency baptism. And in fact, they would authorize midwives to perform baptism on a baby that they didn't think was going to make it. And so there's this practice coming out of the Latin Church during the Reformation of lay baptism. And so that's something that they wanted to address, that no, lay people shouldn't be baptizing. And in fact, within the Reformed tradition, if you read the chapter on baptism in chapter 28, salvation is not tied to it so much that the salvation of the child is dependent on it. So I think that's mostly what it's looking at there. But also, it's not just done by anybody in the church, like a parent or somebody that was influential in their life, a youth director. It should be done by a minister of word and sacrament. Here, we see minister being used in a technical sense as a teaching elder in the church.
My question for you guys is, if it is done by a private person, does that invalidate the baptism?
Ooh.
Does that make it not a baptism because it's not done by one duly ordained? Or is it just a regular?
Well, let's just get clear on it, right? So that's Westminster Confession language, right? Is that a valid baptism is with water in the triune name by a minister lawfully ordained? That's the question you're asking, right? Does this invalidate?
I think of Baptist settings where sometimes, in the pool or at youth camp or something like that, where someone might be baptized by a friend or a family member. Is that a real baptism or not?
My take on it is we have language about valid and also rightly administered. And so when you look at mode of baptism, it prefers two modes of baptism that are rightly administered and doesn't invalidate the other, just that it's not the way that we're going to practice it. I do think in certain settings, if somebody is the one that is putting them under the water and it's under the authority of the church, like, we should not do that in a PCA church. But you look at it as like the words of institution. They had explained what baptism was. They had the minister was there. It was just, okay, and then so-and-so is going to actually put the water on. Okay, you shouldn't do that. But is it invalid? I'd say no, as long as there's Trinitarian formula there and it's under the authority of the church. Unlike, say, Joseph Smith, who goes and baptizes himself. That's invalid. But I think if it's under the authority of the church, it's not right. It's irregular, but I don't think it's invalid. That's my take.
Yeah, I mean, the church question is a big part of that, right? Lawful ordination comes from a real and true church, so you have to consider that as well. What I tell guys, coming for credentials is when we talk to you about validity of baptism, a part of your answer needs to be that it's in consultation with your session, because it's not up to the teaching elder alone to determine the validity of a baptism, but it's up to the session who's admitting those people to the sealing ordinances to determine whether they've had a valid baptism or not. And in some ways, that's really helpful, right? Because even right now, I feel weird having this conversation because we don't want to set like a dogmatic view on every single circumstance, because they can be varying and different across the board.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's a good distinction that Jared brings up, because you going to your Baptist church and your father baptizing you in front of, the entire congregation with the minister aiding is different from Scott, who's not ordained, in his backyard with his children, baptizing them privately. Like, they might be both Baptists in this context, but one is very different than the other, whether they note it or not.
Yeah, so essentially 56.1 is just setting up for us that, well, at least the second half, I guess, is what I'm thinking about now, is that baptism is to be done by a minister. That's the right way for it to be done. There might be some improper baptisms that you have come through, and your session's going to have to figure out how to figure those out. What else? Is there other things here? I mean, I was joking at the beginning about how this might not take us a long time, but we just spent 20 minutes on the first, one sentence of this thing, so I would predict where this is going. Yeah.
Steward of the mysteries of God is Pauline language, and so we could have a citation there, but we don't.
Yeah, it's just a reference to sacraments, right? I mean, word and sacrament ministry. Yeah, good. It's funny, some of these, the validity question can cause a lot of disruption among elders and in presbyteries. The validity of Roman Catholic baptism is a huge question in our presbytery whenever a guy's getting ordained, which is why I often default guys to, hey, you're going to advise your session, but that's ultimately the decision's not with you. So you can tell us your opinion, but you're going to have to defer to your session as a whole.
Well, you can think of the logistical issues that the whole issue brings up,
right? Yeah.
Whether it's presbytery or at the church, if your church says Roman Catholic baptism is not valid and you must baptize again, but the minister believes it is valid, there's a tension there. Is the minister going to baptize even though they already been baptized, or reverse it completely, right? And it's a difficult thing to consider.
I tell my guys, or rather, I tell folks, my view is the safest view to have. So I don't believe that Roman Catholic baptism is valid. our session would disagree with me if it were to come to a vote. But that doesn't do me any harm, right? I'm not being asked to do anything that goes against my personal conviction in that way. But the other side of it would be more difficult. If I thought it was valid and my session required, just like Scott described now, was saying, no, you got to baptize this guy. Now we've got a problem. Now you've got to get granddad to come in and do it because the minister won't do it. Okay, I got a smile from Jared on that, but nothing. All right.
Yeah, I wonder, like, would it, like, get... I want to dig this a little deeper. I'm sorry.
All right, no, come on.
This episode's going to be like 40 minutes on section 1. But I think I'm a proponent that it is valid, and my session historically has said it was invalid. I think if they told me to baptize that person, I would do it in submission to the brethren. I would not have a crisis of conscience because I think it's enough of a liberty of an issue that if the session has deemed this not to be a valid baptism, then it's not, and I should carry that out.
And we're just stewards of the mysteries and not the owners of them, and they belong to the church. Mm-hmm. I'm curious where Jared would fall down on
I would do
precisely what Scott just said.
Jared, would you like find like your uncle's brother to do the baptisms?
My uncle's brother is my dad.
Yeah.
So
can't get anything past Nelson.
Thankfully, my session and I agree that Trinitarian baptism is valid. So I haven't had to cross that bridge.
So Kool-Aid by a Catholic, as long as the Trinity's involved, you're on board.
My session now has come around to that position. When I was coming here, they asked me about that, and I gave my answer, and they all were shocked. But they've come around to the position, and so I don't think I'll be asked to square that circle. But I have had church members come up to me and say, "This is your now position, but I was rebaptized. What do I do now?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's okay. It all works out."
I appreciate your thoughts there, Scott. That's helpful for me from my side of it, knowing that somebody that disagrees on that point would still be willing to submit to the church in a determination that somebody need to be baptized. That's good.
I kind of view it in similar issues. Like there might be like a divorce that has dicey details, and the session might make a decision that the minister personally disagrees with and grant a divorce that shouldn't be granted, or not grant a divorce that should be. But I think you'd submit to the court on that issue. And so I kind of view it in similar. I have my principles and my doctrine, but I think some of this is like even getting to the Baptist, like which is a valid baptism for a Baptist. Yeah. Well, the session decided that backyard baptism was valid or not valid, but I disagree. I think there's submitting to the brethren with some of that.
Who knew it'd be so exciting? We outed ourselves on particular views. Here we go. 56.2. Sort of jumping onto something that was in the first paragraph or first sentence and teasing it out a little bit more. Baptism is not to be privately administered, but in the presence of the congregation under the supervision of the session. So we have a little bit more detail on what we're talking about when we talk about private person or private baptism. There's two qualifiers. In the presence of the congregation under the supervision of the session. Maybe I'll just start off by saying, traditionally in a PCA church, this is what you see. Right? Baptisms happen in a worship service at the front of the congregation. Up front, the congregation sees it, the session's there. In our church, the session comes and stands up front nearby, or whatever elders are present at least, and they're there acknowledging and welcoming the child and the family. And so normally what we see is what's described here. Obviously, we're going to talk about some exceptions, but maybe the question is, why is it significant to point out these two elements, presence of the congregation and supervision of the session?
Sacraments are given to the church, and it's given to her ministers to do, and so it should be in the presence of all the church, and there shouldn't be some sort of there's a private or secret Christian. I mean, no Nicodemus baptisms is what I would say. That I was baptized, but it was in secret, and so nobody can know about it. There's something that's attached to baptism that in some countries it's a dangerous act. You're baptized, and there could be prison time or a price on your head for it. And so it's a major step, and it's to be done in something of a public fashion, of a public witness to your identification with the church.
This backs. Come on. No, you're good,
I think
Scott.
part of this is thinking through the public worship in the church, and so where do people meet on in front of the congregation under the supervision of the session? It's in the context of a worship service that doesn't necessarily need to be in the building necessarily. It could be in other contexts. I view both this and the Lord's Supper. The church can call worship services outside of the local building as it relates to helping with the potential needs of an individual. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be on campus, but it is in the context of worship, I think. This isn't to be something done outside of or abstracted away from the worship of God's people, but part of that worship.
So where this might come into play practically is a context in which it would not be in the church building or may not have the congregation around, is at a private baptism. I remember when I was a hospital chaplain, there were those that would ask for baptisms in the hospital, and part of it was from a Roman Catholic background or emergency baptisms. Thankfully, the supervisors I had there, I told them I am not ordained and it's against my church's beliefs to do that. And they said, you do not have to do that. If you're asked, you can refer them to their own clergy or to a Catholic chaplain. And so I never had to do that, but it does raise the possibility of you're a pastor, you get asked to go to the hospital. Maybe there's a child that can't leave the hospital. Maybe they're going to be there for the next 3 years. Is this something like Lord's Supper where you're like, well, maybe we can call some people from the congregation. Maybe we can have the church there present to witness this. Have you ever thought through some of those circumstances in which, you can't bring them to the church, but is there a way to bring the church to them if there's some sort of circumstance where you have to do something kind of creative like that?
Yeah. Or deathbed conversions, if you're ministering to people in the hospital or hospice care or nursing home and they can't leave those places, but they're demonstrating fruit of the Spirit and a true conversion towards the end of life, you're going to withhold it would be the question.
Prison. You hear of the great ministry, the Bib in Alabama. I believe there are people being baptized into the PCA churches there. I think they kind of view the prison as like another campus of the ministry in some regards, where it's like they're their own, because we can't all obviously meet at a inside the prison because of the security issues. But yeah, I think that's the context of calling it outside of the congregation, and you might have as little as just elders there. Like I think in the context of like a prison, where you obviously can't have, women and children and whole families gathering in there for the most part. But you could have some that, and it could be announced, right? Like still to the congregation, like this is a limited in its scope of who can come, but it's still going to be a public worship service of our church. And there are some limiting factors for that based on the context.
The parallel here, and we're going to get to Lord's Supper in a couple more chapters, but most men are very willing to take the Lord's Supper to a shut-in or to a nursing home and take elders or other church members along, right, and have a service, so to speak. I've run into guys that are willing to do the, at first at least, their first thought is, of course I'd go do the Lord's Supper. I'd take the Lord's Supper to somebody, but then they hesitate about baptism, and it's usually because the language is so particular here. It's not to be privately administered, and even back in the previous section, right? No private person. But the principle, I think, is applicable in both cases. The church moves, right? It's not tied to a location, and so you can take the congregation with you.
Yeah. If you're considering this, though, you need to talk to your session.
That's right.
Your session has to, in a sense, call worship service there and make sure that you do this in a way that this is the church doing it. This wasn't like, I just got a whim and I baptized some people today. Is that okay?
Also, don't preach for 30 minutes at those times either. You do, maybe, just a little brief word, maybe a doxology, a couple prayers, but it doesn't have to be full-fledged.
The whole worship service in that regard. You can abridge it.
That's right. Yeah. It's good.